If there's one thing we've learned about Ukraine since its war with Russia began, it's that this country never backs down from a challenge. Even when faced with seemingly insurmountable adversity, Ukraine rises up. Time and again, it's defied expectations, overcome impossible odds, and done what many believed couldn't be done. And in late March of 2026, Ukraine did it again. It pulled off something that even Russia said was impossible, orchestrating and executing not one, not two, but 3 successive strikes against targets almost 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles beyond its borders, setting some of the Kremlin's most important pieces of infrastructure on fire and smashing its economy in the process. It all began on March 23, when Ukrainian drones struck the port of Primorsk, Russia's main oil export port on the Baltic Sea, situated in the Leningrad region, not far from the country's second biggest city of St. Petersburg and quite close to the international border with Finland too. A critical hub for shipping crude oil and petroleum products out of Russia, Primorsk is a popular docking point for the Kremlin's so-called shadow fleet vessels, privately owned tankers that sneakily transport millions of barrels of sanctioned oil around the world, defying international regulations and providing Moscow with an illegal but impactful source of revenue. Primorsk is also the endpoint of the Baltic pipeline system, boasting a throughput capacity of around 1 million barrels every single day. Enormous amounts of oil are also stored here at any given time, with 18 major reservoirs, each capable of holding up to 50,000 tons. In short, it's an enormously important location for Russia's oil industry, handling literally tens of millions of tons worth of crude and petroleum products every single year. That made it a priority target for Ukraine's forces, which have made it their mission to annihilate Russia's oil infrastructure. They first struck the port of Primorsk in September 2025, halting operations for a couple of days, but the March 2026 attack was even bigger. Local residents reported the sounds of explosions ringing out around the area during the night, with regional governor Alexander Drozdenko compelled to confirm that one of the port's fuel storage tanks had been damaged and set ablaze. In the days that followed, satellite imagery revealed that it wasn't just one tanker. At least 8 of them were confirmed to have been damaged, with fires spreading across the site and firefighting crews battling for several days to get the situation under some semblance of control. Images and videos shared from the scene showed flames licking the air and thick columns of black smoke rising above the port. The same night of the strike, Russian air defenses reportedly intercepted over 60 Ukrainian attack drones. Yet, enough of them managed to slip by the Kremlin's defenses, traveling literally hundreds of miles out of Ukraine and across Russian territory. That alone was an incredible achievement. But Ukraine wasn't stopping there. On March 25, its drone crews carried out another successful strike on another Russian oil port. This time, their target was Ust-Luga, situated in the northern western part of the Leningrad region, hundreds of miles away from Ukraine's border. Just like Primorsk, this is an incredibly important location for Russia. The port can reportedly process around 700,000 barrels of oil each day. It also boasts a significant amount of production infrastructure, processing up to 45 billion cubic meters of natural gas and producing approximately millions of tons of liquefied natural gas (LNG) and liquefied petroleum gas (LPG) each year. In other words, it's exactly the type of location that Ukraine loves to target, and Kyiv's forces have hit this place several times, with a big strike back in January 2024 and another attack later that same year in August. That made the March 2026 attack the 3rd strike on this facility, and it was a big one. Local residents reported the booming sounds of at least 10 separate explosions sounding out across the area, with fire crews quickly dispatched to deal with the raging inferno sweeping its way across the site. Governor Drozdenko once again had to admit that an attack had been carried out. Once more, he attempted to downplay the damage, but images and social media posts revealed the full extent of the damage, with huge fires and clouds of black smoke filling the air in the hours that followed. According to intelligence analysts, 3 oil tankers were damaged in the strike, along with fuel storage tanks, 3 berths, and facilities owned and operated by the Russian energy firm Novatek. The terminal was also sealed off and shut down for several days. and even when it began resuming operations, it wasn't running anywhere near close to its maximum capacity. Experts estimated it would take several weeks for necessary repairs to be carried out, and in ports of this size and scale, even a single day out of action can result in massive economic losses. Ukraine had pulled off 2 attacks that shouldn't have been possible, sending drones through hundreds of miles of Russian airspace and raining fire on some of its most valuable pieces of infrastructure. And it was about to do it all over again. Overnight, on March 26, Ukraine's drone crews returned to action, executing yet another large-scale strike on Russia's oil infrastructure. Their target? The Kirishi Petroleum Organic Synthesis Refinery, otherwise known as the KINEF refinery, also located in the Leningrad region, not far from St. Petersburg, hundreds of miles from Kyiv. Owned by one of the biggest energy firms in Russia, this refinery can process up to 20 million tons of oil each year, making it the second largest refinery in the country in terms of processing capacity. It's a vital source of not just fuel, but various petrochemicals that are used across Russia and sold to other nations, bringing in much-needed funds to fuel the Kremlin's war effort. According to reports, more than 20 Ukrainian drones successfully made it to the area and collided with critical infrastructure at this location. Again, the regional governor, Drozdenko, had nowhere to hide. He confirmed that an attack had been carried out and that an unnamed industrial zone had sustained some damage without going into further details. Perhaps Drozdenko hoped that nobody would find out the truth, but social media was soon filled with reports from local eyewitnesses, many of whom reported seeing raging fires and thick clouds of smoke rising above the site, clear signs that the fuel storage tanks had most likely been set ablaze. Satellite imagery of the refinery also showed evidence that was consistent with a fire breaking out at that location. Across just a handful of days, Ukraine had achieved what would have been deemed unthinkable and impossible not that long ago. 3 strikes, all successful, and all on targets that were hundreds of miles away from Ukrainian territory. And perhaps the most extraordinary part of this story is how the Russians responded to it. They accused Ukraine of cheating. To be more precise, official Russian sources claim that Ukraine must have collaborated with NATO nations, including Poland and the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, in order to carry out these strikes. They argued that there was no way that Ukraine's drones could have traveled that far across Russian regions without being detected and shot down. So they must have flown along a different route, traveling first over Ukraine's western border into Poland, before continuing north into Lithuania, and then across the remaining Baltic nations and along the edge of the Gulf of Finland towards St. Petersburg. They simply refused to admit the truth, that Ukraine's drones had managed to travel hundreds of miles through Russia's own airspace, bypassing multiple radars and air defense systems along the way, before causing incalculable amounts of damage to some of the Kremlin's most valuable oil infrastructure. Why? Because they're ashamed. Russia has long survived on the idea that it's one of the mightiest military forces on the planet, that its air defense systems are some of the best to ever exist, that its territory is impenetrable and its infrastructure so well guarded that it would take a veritable miracle to get anywhere near it, let alone damage or destroy it. Ukraine has shattered that myth. With its continued attacks on Russian infrastructure, an increasing number of successful precision strikes deep into Kremlin territory, it's dismantling Russia's propaganda, undermining the idea that Moscow's forces are so strong and superior. And when it comes to the drone attacks in the Leningrad region, the Kremlin's claims aren't fooling anyone, because there's clear, irrefutable evidence of the exact path those drones took. But before we get to that, if this is the kind of insight you want more of, make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show. We break it down like this every week. So, soon after the attacks on the various oil refineries and export ports close to St. Petersburg, Russian sources shared images purportedly showing the routes that Ukrainian drones must have taken to attack them. These images were widely shared and then completely disproven by the open-source intelligence analyst Drone Bomber on X. In a March 26 post, Drone Bomber noted that there was no way that the Ukrainian drones could have traveled through NATO airspace to carry out these attacks, going on to point out the reams of evidence that exist to disprove this theory. They noted, for example, that whenever Ukrainian drones are spotted in one Russian territory, there are almost always air alerts issued in the neighboring regions. On those exact nights in late March, air alerts were issued across all of the regions situated between Ukraine and the Leningrad region. Maps of the area quite clearly show alerts appearing in one region after another, showing the exact path the drones must have taken through places like Bryansk, Smolensk, and onward, all the way to the ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga, as well as the KINEF refinery. Drone Bomber went on to add that on each of the 3 dates, March 23, 25, and 26, Russian official sources, including the country's Ministry of Defense, reported shooting down dozens of Ukrainian drones. On March 23, for example, Governor Drozdenko reported more than 50 drones shot down. On March 25, 33 more drones were apparently taken out by Russian air defenses. Then on March 26, when the KINEF plant was struck, Russian sources say 21 more drones were shot out of the sky. While Drone Bomber notes that there is a possibility some of the drones might have passed along the western edge of Belarus and not exclusively in Russia's regions, the evidence paints a very clear picture, one that's almost impossible for Russia to deny. The picture is hilarious. Alerts across the whole country, air defense working at full capacity, hundreds shot down. Yet the drones supposedly never flew over Russia. Draw your own conclusions, friends. Logic has never been Russian propaganda's strong suit. And Drone Bomber wasn't the only one hitting back at Russia's desperate attempt to claw back some credibility in the wake of these devastating attacks. Moscow had also attempted to shift blame onto NATO nations, arguing that the Baltic states were allowing their territory and airspace to be leveraged by Ukraine for attacks against Russian infrastructure. In response, the Latvian Ministry of Defense issued a clearly worded statement to counteract the Kremlin's lies, stating in no uncertain terms, Latvia, as well as Lithuania and Estonia, are not involved in the planning and implementation of Ukraine's counterattack on Russia, the ministry emphasizes. With such statements, Russia is demonstrating its weakness and trying to divert attention from the fact that it's unable to defend itself against successful Ukrainian counterattacks on Russian infrastructure on the Baltic Sea coast. The Latvian MOD went on to accuse Russia of yet again attempting a misinformation campaign against the Baltic states in order to discredit NATO, divide society, undermine trust in state institutions, and weaken support for Ukraine. Now, there are several conclusions we can draw from this intriguing series of events. First, from the Ukrainian perspective, this is a major success story, and yet another example of Kyiv's forces overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to achieve something that many would have said simply wasn't possible. But that, in many ways, has been the story of this war since it began. Right from the start, it was evident that Ukraine was the underdog, outmatched by Russia in every metric that mattered. It didn't have anywhere near the same levels of military experience or expenditure, nor did it have the enormous army and vast amounts of tanks, jets, and other military equipment that its opponent had at its disposal. Indeed, the odds seemed so heavily stacked against Ukraine, even some of the most optimistic military analysts feared that Kyiv could fall within the first few weeks, with many expecting Ukraine's defenses to crumble beneath the sheer weight and intensity of the Russian war machine. As we now know, that didn't happen. Far from crumbling or conceding defeat, Ukraine's forces rose up to meet the seemingly impossible challenge that lay ahead of them. They dug in, they defended their land, and they began striking back, achieving one incredible victory after another. Over and over, they disproved their doubters, achieved things that shouldn't have been possible, and took the fight to their enemy. Despite being a much smaller nation than Russia, with only a fraction of its resources, Ukraine has proven more than a match for its opponent. And it's only getting stronger as the war goes on. We can see that in events like this, where Ukraine isn't just defending its own territory along the front lines in regions like Luhansk and Kharkiv, but is also orchestrating incredibly impactful destructive attacks on Russian soil. It started off with just a few strikes here and there, but Ukraine soon ramped things up, carrying out more and more attacks in 2025 than into 2026. Now, it's reached a point where it can hit Russia hard day after day, blowing up multiple high-value targets like the ports and oil refineries around the Leningrad region. And it doesn't matter how well protected or how far away from Ukraine these places are. Kyiv's forces have and will consistently find ways to light them on fire, leaving Russia with ever-increasing repair bills and an ever weaker economy in the process. The very fact that Ukrainian defenders were able to orchestrate 3 separate attacks so close together and enjoyed impressive levels of success with each one of them is incredibly encouraging. It sends a message to the Kremlin that Kyiv is not letting up and that its attacks will only become more intense, more destructive, and more of a problem the longer the war continues. Indeed, only a few days after the KINEF refinery strike on March 30, Ukraine hit Russia again, with a series of explosions rocking the city of Toliati in the southwest region of Samara. There, residents reported no less than 5 explosions in total around 5 a.m. local time, with thick plumes of smoke and several fires reportedly breaking out at a major chemical plant. The same night, reports also emerged of a drone blitz on another important facility, the Alchevsk metallurgical plant in the occupied Luhansk region, which was once used for civilian metallurgy but has been repurposed by Russia for military production. A large-scale fire was reported at the site, as the Kremlin's air defenses yet again failed to deal with the aerial threat. For Russia, meanwhile, the events in the Leningrad region are simply more embarrassing examples of the country's remarkable inability to defend its own territory. Each one conclusively proves that the Kremlin's air defenses, which are supposed to be some of the best in the world, simply aren't capable of dealing with the Ukrainian drone army. Not only are Russian forces struggling to make any gains on the ground, suffering tens of thousands of casualties each month in exchange for almost zero territorial advantage, but the country is also suffering increasing numbers of attacks on its own soil. And these attacks matter, because even if the fires can eventually be put out and damaged infrastructure can be rebuilt, Russia is still losing enormous amounts of oil every time one of its tankers or fuel storage facilities goes up in flames. It's still having to halt or scale down operations for days, weeks, or months at a time, which in turn reduces the maximum amounts of oil and other products it can process, store, ship, and sell. In 2025, for example, the Primorsk port exported almost 17 million tons of petroleum products. Ust-Luga, meanwhile, handled almost 33 million tons. When Ukraine's drones hit, both of those facilities were set on fire and forced to cease operations as fire crews and rescue personnel rushed in to try and take control of the situation. During that time, no tankers were going in or out, no oil was moving anywhere. Instead, vast quantities of it were simply being burned up in the blaze. And even though some level of order was eventually restored, it doesn't take away from the fact that the port's operations were massively disrupted and may not return to peak levels for quite some time. That means less money flowing into the country's coffers, which are already running extremely low due to the spiraling costs of the war so far. With less money to work with, it's going to become that much harder for Russia to keep paying its bills, covering the extortionate expenses of military salaries, procurement, production, and so on. With less fuel to work with too, it's also going to find it harder to strike the delicate balance between selling some oil overseas while keeping enough back to power its military vehicles and other elements of its war machine. In short, the situation is getting increasingly grim for Russia, which is exactly what Ukraine wanted. The whole purpose of Kyiv's attacks on Russian oil infrastructure is to force the Kremlin's hand, to make the war utterly unsustainable, to give Vladimir Putin no other option but to withdraw his forces and agree to a ceasefire at last. And if Ukraine can keep this up, the prospect of peace will slowly but surely become less of a pipe dream and more of a realistic proposition. Now, you can learn more about how Ukraine's deadly drone army is tearing Russia apart piece by piece in this video. Or for something completely different, check out this video to discover one of Ukraine's latest and greatest military innovations, a science fiction-style laser weapon that can blast the Kremlin's UAVs right out of the sky. And finally, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more breaking military news, insightful analysis, and detailed breakdowns, just like this.